Hello and welcome to the next in my mini series on putting on binding, whether that's straight grain binding or bias binding. Now, when you're putting binding on a project, it depends on whether you've got a project where you're likely to see both sides, like a quilt, or a project where you're not really going to see the back, like a wall hanging, for instance. And that dictates how you're going to put your binding on. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to put binding on a project where you're going to see both sides of your quilted item. So that could be a full quilt, for instance. Maybe table mats is another project that you might be working on. So I'm going to demonstrate that. So I'm going to switch camera and just get the desktop. There we go. So we've got here a project. This is one of my test projects that I do where I've been playing with some free motion work on here. Not very exciting, I know. So let's just pretend this is the front of the project. And we've got our binding strip, and this is a straight grain binding because we're just going round squares. So we don't need to have a bias binding. We don't need the stretch of the bias. So this particular way of putting on binding is for projects where you're likely to see both sides, like on a quilt, you're likely to see the front side and you're likely to see the back side as well. So to do this, I always start at the bottom of the quilt, so I finish and end on the bottom of the quilt. And don't worry, I've got a video coming up to show you how to do mitered corners. But for all the straight sides, it's exactly the same. So we've got our bias strip, we've got it all folded up, and I'm going to open one side up, or I can open all of it up if you want to. Okay, so we've got our folds there. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold over that little end there because we don't want any raw edges showing. And you can finger press that down, or you can give it a press with the iron. I've just finger pressed that now. So the next thing I'm going to do is put that folded edge down against about halfway along the bottom edge of my quilt. So we are pretending this is a full-size quilt and this is the bottom edge of my quilt. So I'm going to put that there about halfway along. This is because when we have brought this binding all the way round the edge, and we're going to end up tucking it in here, so by the time it's all folded over the top, this little fold at the end will make a nice clean edge. But for now, we're just going to attach that raw edge to raw edge, and I'm going to stick a pin in to keep it there along that edge. And for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to do a couple of inches to show you. I like with all my videos, all my demonstration videos, to cut them down to really small little bits so that you can see each technique at a time. So I've pinned that in place. And the next thing I'm going to do is get my machine and I'm going to sew down there. So I'm going to pause this video, and by the wonders of magic of technology, I'm going to reappear in just a moment with my machine. Okay, complete magic. So I've got my quilt with my binding underneath the walking foot of my machine. We need the walking foot, like we've been doing for the quilting, because we're going through multiple layers. I'm going to start catching that little fold to get that down, and I'm going to sew along this fold line here. And when I sew along that fold line, I'm just going to nudge into this side of the binding, not into this side of the binding. So going along that line there, or just to the right. So if I look at my walking foot, I'm going to look for where there's normally a little line in the center of my walking foot. I'm just going to use that as my guide to go along that little line there. And I'm going to lock stitch to start with, which is already set up on my machine. So I'm just going to do a couple of inches to show you this. And obviously as I come to the pins, I can take those out. So let me get sewing. It's going to do a lock stitch first. Very difficult to see what I'm doing with my camera in the way. So can you see I'm on that fold, but literally just a a gnat's whisker. I don't know if that's a technical sewing term, but a gnat's whisker into the outer edge. Okay. And I'm just going to finish there for the purposes of this exercise. You would, of course, carry on round and we'll do our mitered corner there, but I would do that in a separate video for you. So I'm just going to pause this and show you what to do next. Okay, sewing machine disappeared. So this is what we've just sewn on this piece here. I meant to say your stitch length needs to be probably around 3 to 3.5 because you've got a lot of layers to go through here. So we've sewn this on all the way around, and what we've done is we've come all the way around, and this little bit I've just sewn on when my camera was on pause is just to show you that this will have come in here, and then this is our end bit. So your binding will have gone all the way around and come to meet back here, and then it will overlap this bit, the first bit that we've just sewn on. So remember that little fold? So this, the end of it, the tail if you like, will come over and overlap, and you'll stitch over that little overlap, over that folded edge, that first folded edge, and do a lock stitch there. And when I'm happy with that, that's my line all matches up, which that doesn't particularly, but this is a demonstration, I'm going to cut that little excess off because I don't really want that. And that's inside the binding, so we're going to get rid of that. Like that. And then we're going to fold, so open it all out first, so keep that fold there, open it out so you've got these folds, and then I'm going to fold to the edge, so fold up to the edge of your project, flip your project over, so this is now the back of my project. Let's get that under the camera. There we go. So this is from the other side now. So this is the tail end that we've just sewn in. This is the bit that we started with. So I'm going to fold it over the edge. And can you see here, we've got a seam line going along there. So that's where we've attached it. That's the reverse of where we just attached it. So I'm going to fold over and I'm going to go along that outer fold, this fold here, and gently pull it over so it covers that stitch line. And this is one of the reasons, if you've watched my previous videos, that I start with 2.5 inches as a width of fabric to make my binding, and that just gives an extra little bit to get over this edge here, which is quite thick, and cover that stitch line. So that's what I'm trying to do with my 2.5 inch strips to start with. Okay, so this bit here, this tail end is tucked in. Can you see? Let's get that close up to camera. So it's nicely tucked in. I'm going to cover my stitch line, and then I'm going to put some pins in it to hold it, because now I am going to slip stitch this down. And I know it depends whether you're a lover of slip stitching or not. I don't know, some people like doing it in front of the television. I'm not the greatest lover of it, but needs must. So if you've got a quilt and it's going to be seen both sides, then you need to be slip stitching it from the reverse so it's invisible. So let me get my needle and thread, quickly show you how to slip stitch, just in case you're new to slip stitching. So I've got my thread, it's double on the needle here, and I'm going to start, hide my knot in the binding, get all those threads, and let's do this quite up close to camera, let's get all that knot hidden away. I'm going to do a little straight stitch down, so I'm hiding it underneath the binding, and I'm going to come along about half a centimetre, come up through my binding, make a stitch and do that. again. Okay, so that's all we are going to do to finish off the back of your binding. So I'm not going to do that all the way along because that would be quite boring to watch. So the back of our binding here, so we've got invisible stitches going along here, but then of course from the other side, from the right side, we're not going to see that stitching, but our binding is nicely firmly attached to the edge of our binding. So that is the technique when you want to be seeing both sides of your binding. And in the next video, I'll show you what to do if you've got something like a wall hanging where it doesn't matter necessarily what the back looks like, because nobody's ever going to see it because it will be against a wall. So watch out for that video, but I hope this one has been helpful. And also do look out for the one that I'm going to show you how to do the mitered corners. Okay, hope that's helpful. See you soon.